we've been talking a lot about empathy, and so I want to come back to that, this idea of empathy or emotions. And I want to share a bit, perhaps a scenario that I've encountered with just speaking to teachers across the network. So here we go. A Black teacher says, "I feel like when I teach about slavery and the Civil War, all the white students are looking at me strangely." Or the white teacher says, "I don't know how I should teach about slavery and Jim Crow when there are students of color in the room." So what advice do you have for teachers in situations like these?
So having been a Black teacher who talks about this stuff, a white teacher who talks about this stuff, yeah, I mean, we grapple with this a lot. You know, we thought through this when we created Race and the American Story. You know, what does it mean to have someone like me talk about these things, someone like Adam, when we're together on as a partnership doing this kind of work? What do our identities bring to the table, right? How does it impact the message of the lesson that we're trying to produce or to communicate? And those are those are real. You know, those folks look at who is singing a song, you know, or who is painting a picture, or writing a great book, right? I think the composer matters, the teacher matters. These are real questions that are realistic, and I think what we cannot do is say, you are impersonal, you should be impersonal, you should not be yourself, you know, you are just a teacher, because we're not just one thing. We are human beings with feelings, with backgrounds, and so on. So we bring that to the table when we are deans of pedagogy or a professor and so on. So what I would say is that we should bring that in. We should position ourselves, explain to our students who we are. I often remind my students that I'm Black, but I'm not African American. You know, I'm not, my ancestors were not brought to the United States. They were brought to the Caribbean, but not to the United States. And my father is Nigerian, so my father's folks were never, you know, so I make sure that people understand that I do have some distance here, that I've worked really hard to scale. Like I have done a lot of studying, I've done a lot of reading, certainly a lot of writing about this. I've done the work. We can all do the work to get closer in. And we should challenge our students to do that too. So whether you're a Black teacher, a white teacher, a teacher of color from some other ethnicity, we should all say who we are, position ourselves, let the students understand where we're coming from. Are we from Chicago? Are we from the South? You know, and then tackle the subject matter together, right? And I know that Adam is going to say, and the lesson is still the lesson, you know, that the topic on the syllabus is still the topic. So when we introduced Phyllis Wheatley to our curriculum, Adam still had to teach Phyllis Wheatley, you know, and do it as a white male. And I still have to teach Thomas Jefferson and pull out the nuances of Jefferson as a Black woman, but I am who I am.
Yeah, I think that was really well said, that I agree that teachers shouldn't try to assume a sort of artificial impersonality or impartiality about things when they're teaching. I think that it's important to look at the classroom as a dynamic space. It's an experience for students and for the teacher, ideally, and it's a process, ideally, for the students and the teacher that involves, moving towards knowledge and understanding and empathy as well. And so I think that, as you put it, we all sort of come from different places and unique places, right? And there's where we come from, and then I think there's where we meet right? So we all might come from different places, but I think it's important in a classroom environment and a learning environment particularly that we meet at some point, right? Because I think there's a valuable expressive component to our personal experiences and background, and that's important. And then I think there's an important educative component to our personal experiences and background. And in the classroom, I think it's crucial that that educative component be capitalized on, right? That we learn from each other and that we meet in a middle place, a common ground or something, though that doesn't overwhelm or obliterate our separate identities, but that now we sort of can understand that pathway better between where we've come from and where we meet, and we can traverse it, right, comfortably, and in a way that we're not afraid to meet with other people and converse with them and have common ground, but we also aren't afraid to be confident in who we are and our unique identity. So I think both are possible, and the classroom is a good space for that, to constantly be aware both of where we are coming from as a teacher or as a student, and not be afraid to express that, but also be attentive to where we're going to meet and learn together.
So I can imagine having a conversation with maybe high school students, maybe 11th and 12th graders, to say, I find this topic difficult to talk about. Would you suggest that same kind of, I don't know, maybe it's vulnerability in the classroom when you're talking to 6th graders? Would it be a burden that's maybe too much for them to carry if I start to talk about this is actually really difficult for me? Or do you think that the young can also need to hear that?
I think the young need to hear it. I think though that our generation has had time to, and has had a history of generations saying this is too difficult, I don't want to talk about it, right? Or race and racism, it doesn't affect me, so I'm just not going to talk about it, or whatever iteration of that uncomfortableness is in the room. But I do think that at this time we do need to put that behind us and say, this is going to be difficult for all of us, but this is our history, and we can do it. We do it carefully, we do it deliberately, we do it with great caution and care, but we have to do it. I'm not sure that starting the conversation with, this is difficult for me, is useful for our future. I think this is going to be difficult for all of us because it is a difficult history, but it is our full history.
Yeah, I agree. I think that too often, I think we do underestimate what young children are capable of processing and understanding, and that it is important to use, I really like the train metaphor, and I think in a classroom it's especially relevant that the teacher and the students are in the same train car, they're on the same train going the same direction, and so I think that's part of building a classroom rapport and of being together in the search for truth and mutual understanding and learning, to have that kind of vulnerability and to experience it and express it in a communal way as a classroom, I think is good. And I think that even at younger ages that students are capable of handling that.
Maybe you have advice for the school administrators as well. I know that that's your role now. When we have a teacher, for example, who says, I can't teach about this topic because of my race, or I can't teach about this topic impartially, I must teach it personally, according to my ethnicity or my family history or my cultural identity. How does the school administrator, in love and sensitivity, help the teacher teach?
Well, I think that here, as we were saying with the idea of where one comes from versus where we meet in the classroom, I think that it is important for an administrator, would be important for the teacher to feel supported in teaching authentically, I think, and feeling empowered to teach authentically. So to not dissuade a teacher from expressing that in the classroom or teaching in a certain way because of where they're coming from personally, but then also being attentive again to where the students are coming from as well and how that will impact the students and where you will meet as a classroom in learning. So yeah, I think that would be important, to empower the teacher to teach genuinely and authentically.
And I would just add that when we become teachers educators in any way. This is the work that we have committed to participate in. You know, we didn't choose to be engineers or some other profession. We chose to be educators, and so it is our responsibility to take it on. If we're teaching history, literature, anything in the humanities, liberal education, any of those fields under that umbrella, we have to do it all. You know, I can't come to this work that we're doing and say, you know, I'm Black, I just want to do Black stuff. You know, I just, if we're talking about American history, I just want to do it through Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I don't want to consider any of the other history if I'm talking about American history. Now, if I'm talking about African American history, I might be able to do that. Although even there, we do have to include what was Frederick Douglass up against? You know, what was Du Bois dealing with? You know, so we do have to bring context to everything. So as an administrator, if I had a young professor come in and say, look, I don't want to, you know, I'm white, I grew up in Nebraska or wherever, right? And I just don't want to deal with that. I would say maybe find another job, you know, because that's what we sign up for. Now I understand, especially in higher ed, we do specialize, you know, so we do, you know, focus in on, I do study Black music, but I've challenged myself to also consider what are the other kinds of music that have evolved as a result of Black music. There's rock and roll. I study Bruce Springsteen. You know, like what can we see in some of the other music that is out there? You know, that has either impacted Black music. You know, there are instruments that are used in jazz that came from Europe. You know, there's some parallels between country music and soul music and so on that really gives a more robust picture of the history of Black music. So that's my long way of saying, do the work.
I have a metaphor for you, actually,
here we
following
go.
up on this. So I tend to think of this, and rightly or wrongly, but I tend to think of it as like tributaries of a river. What you were just describing, I think, more or less, where we're coming from is like a sort of a tributary that flows into a river that in some places we have in common with other people who are coming from different places. And so it's important to keep both of those in mind and to come from where you're coming from authentically and genuinely and in terms of background expertise, but to be aware of the river that other tributaries are also flowing into, and maybe that's the classroom or something. But that metaphor helps me to think about that.
Great metaphor.
Thank you.
I'm going to steal that one.